Welcome, everyone. Pleasure to have you here today. We are the Behavioral Services Unit at North LA County Regional Center. We're part of the clinical department. Today, we will be presenting on behavioral services from North LA County Regional Center. We have our presenters here today. We have Lisa DePiero, Annette Sinanian, Jessica Punsambat, and Courtney Arelis. And so we are going to move on to, I'm going to try to move us along on the next slide. So we'll talk about a little bit about what ABA is, Applied Behavior Analysis, and the types of behavioral supports that are available through the Regional Center and through our generic resources. We'll talk about the funding sources a little bit and the criteria for each of the funding sources. And then we'll really talk about the steps to access those behavioral services. And then we'll provide you some resources. And finally, we'll open it up to some questions that you may have for us. I'm going to pass on the controls over to Jessica now.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. I'm Jessica Punsambat. I'm the Autism Program Specialist at North LA County Regional Center, Behavior Consultant. And let's start with, what is ABA? Well, based on the Latterman Act, ABA means the design, the implementation, and the evaluation of systematic instructional and environmental modifications to promote positive social behaviors and reduce or ameliorate behaviors that are interfering with learning and social interaction. And really, more generally, ABA is the science and field under which North LA County Regional Center categorizes behavioral services that are provided. And let's move on to a little bit of a brief overview of the service. And so first, ABA is an evidence-based practice. It's the application of evidence-based procedures to address behaviors that matter to each individual. It also is an approach that may be beneficial and effective in changing the behaviors of people of any age, really, with or without a developmental disability. It's also individualized treatment. It seeks to understand how the environment, both internal and external, influence behaviors. In addition, it helps address challenging behaviors that are interfering with daily life and teaches more meaningful and pro-social skills that are unique to the person in efforts to improve their quality of life. It is also flexible. It's flexible and uses multiple methodologies to adapt to and support individual needs. It's really largely a service that's about people and their behavior in multiple settings. It really focuses on meeting the whole person's needs using a very holistic approach to set the individual up for success. And last but not least, consistency with the service is key. The power in the service really comes down to the consistent implementation of the treatment. And what we want to talk about next is the funding sources. Really, we are going to present today is the funding sources and the criteria, some of the things that we offer from the regional center, also with Medi-Cal, and also that private insurance and self-funded insurance really offers. And now we'll pass it on to Courtney.
Hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Arelis, and I'm a behavioral consultant at North LA Regional Center. And today I will be providing a brief overview on the behavioral services that the Regional Center offers. Here are the behavioral services that we offer. This is the brief description of them. So we have ABA, and then under ABA, we have parent education training and FBAs. And so I'm going to talk about each one briefly. So this is the PEG, which is a 16-hour parent education group. And it's essentially a 16-hour course where families learn the basics of ABA. And it will provide the families with the principles of learning, and will also prepare the families with what to expect during ABA sessions when they're in the home setting. This course is mandatory for individuals under 21 that the Regional Center is funding for ABA services. typically the class should be completed like before the direct services start in the home. However, the assessment can be done before this course is completed as well. And so it is important that this is available to all age groups. And what would happen is the provider will there's a provider that's going to be contracted with the regional center, and usually from our vendor list. And then you get the time and date of the class, and families will then ask for the modality for like whether you want to do it group format, video, or conference. After that, the families would inform the service coordinator, and the service coordinator would authorize attendance for the course. And then once the class has been attended and completed, then the families will receive a certificate of completion. Next, we have the Early Intensive Behavior Intervention Program. Now, this is also known as Discrete Child Training, or DTT, and it is for individuals under 7 years old, and it's typically for someone with an ASD diagnosis where there are skill deficits. However, it is still appropriate for individuals without an ASD diagnosis, and they still have certain skill deficits as well. So it's really important to note that this is one of the most pivotal times to take advantage of, mainly because the earlier the better. So the earlier that we provide support for the child, the better the outcomes for the child later in life. And the purpose of this is to really essentially catch a child up in terms of development. So we want to the whole goal is to teach the child the primary foundational skills. And we also want the goal is also for the child to, eventually enter the mainstream kindergarten or first grade and just be able to be in the least restrictive educational setting as possible. And next is the intensive ABA. So next is intensive ABA, and this is mainly a more focused program that focuses on reducing any any major challenging behaviors that impact the learner. So it's usually for people who have behaviors that pose a threat to the health and safety of themselves, like self-injury, or any life-threatening behaviors like running into traffic. Also, for behaviors that pose a threat to others as well. So physical aggression that can possibly result in injury. And this is also, it's important to note that this is also like for any diagnosis, for any age, and it's usually that needs a more focused ABA approach to reduce those behaviors, the more challenging behaviors. Next is the in-home parent education, also known as IHPE, and this is more of a training-focused service. So here, the families are provided with families or even staff. So it can be used for families in the home where there are less severe problem behaviors, but they are still provided with strategies on how to reduce behaviors that interfere with the learning. It is also even possible for staff in group homes. So we can also have a model where the staff is being trained on the specific behavioral strategies to work with the individual. And again, this is for any diagnosis in any age. And it's usually for less significant problem behaviors. So not severe, but the behaviors still continue to interfere with their learning. And now I will pass on the baton to Lisa.
Thank you, Courtney. Okay, so as we know, there are several funding sources for ABA services. So I will start with focusing on Regional Center as the funding source, and we'll start with discussing the recommendations and how hours are determined. So typically for DTT and intensive ABA, the hours are no more than 40 hours per week, and the direct hours are authorized on a weekly basis, whereas the supervision hours are authorized on a monthly basis. For the in-home parent education program, it's typically no more than 41 hours over a 6-month period. And we always want to remember that the recommendations are individualized and they're determined by the ABA provider and submitted to Regional Center for review. And it's all based on that individual's needs. There is an hourly limitation across all settings, so we always want to consider that individual, whether they're in school full-time, whether they have other therapies such as speech, OT, PT, and then the length of service is reviewed every 6 months by our team, and then it's determined, ongoing services are determined based on the need as well. And the ABA service criteria when Regional Center is the funding source. So first, there does have to be an identified need within the IPP and the IFSP and assessed as appropriate. At Regional Center, ABA is appropriate for any age and any diagnosis. If the individual has Medi-Cal fee-for-service or straight Medi-Cal, if Medi-Cal and/or private insurance denies ABA, or there's no insurance or generic resource and it doesn't cover or offer ABA. If the individual is over 21 years old, regardless of Medi-Cal with the signed plan or fee-for-service Medi-Cal, and then any diagnosis. And so these are the steps for accessing in-home ABA when Regional Center is the funding source. So first, there's a need for behavioral support that's identified within the IPP or IFSP. And so that is discussed with your service coordinator. And then the next step, you will select a vendor for the 16-hour PEG. The provider must be contracted with Regional Center and from our vendor list, and you will then inform your CSC who you would like to select. The next step, you will choose a vendor that will provide the in-home direct ABA services. This must also be a provider contracted with Regional Center from our vendor list. Just to keep in mind, it doesn't have to be the same provider. You can have a different provider for the 16-hour PEG and another provider for the in-home ABA service. Next, you will inform your CSC of your ABA vendor choice, and then they will start the authorization for the assessment, which is also known as the FBA, Functional Behavior Assessment. And then you will set up the behavior assessment with that ABA provider so you can begin and start your first appointment. Once the assessment is completed, the report is then submitted to Regional Center for review, and then services start as needed. Okay, so now we will move on to health insurance as the funding source. So we'll start with Medi-Cal. So the service criteria to access ABA with Medi-Cal is that it must be medically necessary. ABA must be prescribed or recommended by a licensed physician or psychologist. The members must be under the age of 21 with or without a formal diagnosis. Medi-Cal is active with an assigned managed care plan. And if Medi-Cal is secondary to a private insurance, a denial of ABA from the private insurance is needed. For private and self-funded, typically if the consumers are under age 26 with the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, and then we do recommend contacting your respective health plans to confirm coverage criteria because it can vary from plan to plan. And we'll go ahead and pass this on to our next presenter, Annette.
Hello, everyone. My name is Annette Sinang, and I'm the Behavioral Services Supervisor here at North LA County Regional Center. So now we're going to discuss all of the different services that we have available. So we have the parent education group, and if the funding source is through your Medi-Cal or private insurance, in both instances, the parent education group is optional but recommended. If you choose to pursue the parent education group, contact your North LA County Regional Center Service Coordinator. One difference between Medi-Cal and private insurance, however, is that if you are seeking co-payments for co-insurance or deductibles through North LA County Regional Center, you must participate in the parent education group. In that case, please contact your service coordinator to determine the criteria and/or qualifications for support in this particular area. Different funding sources have different steps that need to be taken in order to access ABA services. If your funding source is through your Medi-Cal, you must contact your personal care physician or licensed physician in order to obtain approval for ABA services. You need to obtain a recommendation for ABA as a medical necessity. After that, you can select an ABA provider that is contracted in network. You can reach out to your particular Medi-Cal plan in order to obtain the list of providers. After that, you can set up a behavior assessment with your selected ABA provider and communicate with them in order to complete the process. This is including dates of your interviews and observations and assessments. A behavior assessment is then completed and the report is provided to your Medi-Cal for recommendations for review. And once approved, services begin as they're deemed appropriate. If your funding source is private insurance, however, let's see. The steps of ABA are very, very similar. You contact your PCP and confirm coverage and copays. You select an ABA provider that is in network with your private insurance. You can, again, obtain that list from your particular health plan. You set up the ABA assessment with that particular provider. You communicate with that provider, again, deciding dates and interviews with the provider directly. A behavior assessment is completed and provided to your insurance company with the recommendations for review. Once that's been approved by your insurance provider, then services can begin as appropriate. If ABA services are denied, what are you supposed to do? So here we have different steps depending on what route you're taking in order to obtain your ABA services. If you have ABA service that's denied by your private insurance, you can discuss this with your North LA County Service Coordinator and request a denial letter for the ABA in writing. Send that denial letter to your North LA County Service Coordinator for review. And ABA services can begin through North LA County Regional Center once deemed appropriate for the client. If your private insurance and Medi-Cal is secondary and you have still received a denial for the ABA, you can request that denial in writing, send the denial to the Medi-Cal provider for review. The Medi-Cal provider then either deems the service appropriate and starts funding. If not, they may deny the service, and you can get that denial letter as well, obtain both denial letters, send that to your North LA County Regional Center Service Coordinator for approval of the service if denied by both insurance and Medi-Cal. If you have Medi-Cal only, you discuss the need for ABA services with your Medi-Cal provider, and if that is denied, you obtain that denial letter in writing. You provide that to your North LA County Regional Center Service Coordinator for review. Once deemed appropriate for ABA services can then be funded through North LA County Regional Center. It is very important that the services are reviewed and that the denials are appealed for each of these providers in order to obtain appropriate Medi-Cal service or ABA services for your clients. We have a list of resources here that you guys can look at if you have any further questions or would like to seek out further information in regards to ABA, the different kinds of services. If you want to look at the different healthcare providers, we have some modules available here through the Affirm modules, which are a wonderful resource to provide just general ABA information. Captain.ca.gov is another wonderful resource where you can seek information in regards to autism, some data in regards to evidence-based practices. North LA County also has a family-focused resource center, which is a great resource. Of course, there's North LA County's website, which also has multiple resources. We have LA Care and HealthNet here as well, linked for you guys to seek out information, as well as Autism Speaks. And then the BACB's website if you want specific information regarding credentialing and any other information regarding the Behavior Analytic Board.